There's many traditional explanations of the way the world works, traditional religious explanations, philosophical, psychological. Everybody, a lot of people, let's put it that way, are always trying to figure out what's going on here. And very intelligent, sometimes brilliant people will come up with all their different theories about it. And many of them, some of them are not valid on any level, but many of them are quite valid on one level or another. Someone was asking me yesterday, there's an event at Ananda Village that is just finishing today, so our ranks are a little thinner than they sometimes are because a number of people are still up there. But I was at the village yesterday. The village is our main community. I see some brand new faces here, so I just want you to know. And he was just asking me about, he mentioned a few other different ways that people have of trying to sort out the meaning of life, different paths, different teachers, shamanism, just different things that happen. What did I think about them? I asked, it was a man I didn't know well, I asked first, what level are you asking this question from? If you are a disciple of one of the paths you're asking about, I want to answer you in a certain way. If you are committed to the path that I'm following, then I can have a different answer for you, because it just depends on where you stand yourself on the spectrum, what's meaningful to you. My answer was that there's nothing that I see in anything that he asked that I would object to. What I've seen about the path that Yogananda brought, and as Swami Kriyananda has extended it, is that it's all-encompassing. And I mentioned that in the course of time of visiting India over many years, which we did on a pilgrimage, we would often visit different saints and sadhus, some of them quite well known. And I find great inspiration, great fun in the way that they did their lives. But afterwards I would always say, I'm so glad it's not my path. Because what would I do with the rest of my time? What would I do with my work life and relationships and friendships and art and just all these different things when there's just a piece of it in there? But that doesn't mean there's nothing to learn or nothing that's true. And also spiritual understanding evolves. It doesn't evolve from the point of view of the masters. I have a friend, he's passed away now, but he was an Episcopal priest, and I was asking him certain questions about Christianity, just details of the Bible that he was extremely familiar with, that I was just learning. And there was a fundamental contradiction between the Church's position and the position of self-realization. And this man told me that the teachings of Jesus had actually evolved over 300 centuries, that Jesus himself only knew part of it, and that it took all these 300 years for the rest of it to be figured out. I sort of stared at him. You're actually telling me this seriously. There's not like a punchline. This is not going to turn into a joke at a certain point. And we kind of looked at each other, and I said, Jesus understood it all. What happened was that for 300 years, people gradually brought it down to the level where they could understand it. And it devolved. It didn't evolve. That's what happened to it. And he laughed and said, my life was simpler before I met you. And there you have it. But one of the teachings that the New Age has really loved to throw away is Satan. Because Satan is really something else. I'm going to just diverge you for a moment, just tell you fascinating how things work out. Because I'm a Nayaswami and I wear this color blue all the time, somebody gave me a book about the history of the color blue. Fascinating what people write about. And it was actually absolutely fascinating, because we've come up from Kali Yuga into a higher age, so many, many things have developed. So even like the capacity to dye a color, is a form of technology that we consider rather old school, but at a certain point, it was a revolution. between indigo and brought from India and things like that. And at a certain point, the different guilds, I mean, the world, it changes. Like all the nouns are different, but the consciousness is exactly the same. So like there were different guilds for each color. And the red guild was extremely powerful. And so when the blue guild began to get traction, the red guild did everything it could to get rid of the blue guild. And this kind of war went on for a while. And finally, some artist made the devil red and the Virgin Mary blue. And that was the beginning of blue. And sort of the end of red, you know? But it's like that, it just, even those two thoughts were not any revelation, or maybe they were, but it was an economic war. It's just amazing how things develop. Napoleon said, history is a lie agreed upon, written by the victors. You know, the church was victorious over the Gnostics, so Christianity was defined by the church. We're in that same war. This is a reincarnational cycle now, where self-realization is fighting against institutionalism, and we're doing it again. This time we're going to win, apparently. Yes! The Gnostics' position was that inspiration is individual. The church's position was that it has to be passed through the lines of authority. I mean, you can see what a huge difference that is, because if it's passed through lines of authority, only some people can actually commune with God, and everybody is dependent on the institution as an intermediary. That's what constitutes institutional religion, not actually having a nice building. That's just a convenience. It's when something other has to be in place, the right ceremony, the right priest, the right dogma. That's when it becomes an institution, because it has elevated itself above your individual relationship with God. So one of the things that the institutional churches have put forward is the devil, because, I mean, from the point of view of someone who's spent most of their life working in a community and trying to inspire people to cooperate with a temperament that's not always really, really patient, mine, the desire to have something more powerful than your will is really, like, you can understand how a church authority would want it. And the threat of eternal damnation is a really convenient tool. It really works. You know, people really stay in line because eternal damnation is a really, really long time. So everybody just stays in the fold, and you don't really have to answer all those hard questions because you just threaten to excommunicate them. It's a big deal. Teresa of Avila, who became a very great mystic and persecuted by the church and then canonized as the system goes, she, at 8 years old, she figured it out, that why risk the entire life and might accidentally do something that would have her be eternal damned, because the way to salvation was to be martyred. So she was 8 years old. She persuaded her younger brother that they would go off and they would find the Moors somewhere, because the Spain was always fighting the Moors, and they would go into the camp of the Moors and they would have their heads cut off, and then they would be martyred, and then they would have eternal salvation. I think it was a very efficient idea on her part. Fortunately, her parents found her and brought her and her brother home, and so she had to take a more normal route. But in all of that, you have this picture of Satan. And Satan is out there all the time trying to make you do stuff that you know, or at least the church says you shouldn't do, and maybe even your own conscience says you shouldn't do. And he's red because of the guilds, you know, he's red, that's his picture. And a lot of force goes against that. So we come into the, we can have it all, new age, we want to throw away all these old things, we're going to be free, I can have it my way. And a lot of things that shouldn't have been thrown away got thrown away. Because the real essence of the idea of Satan is not based on any church authority. It's actually based on our actual experience. I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm not an integrated singleton. I've been deeply committed to the spiritual path well, really my whole life, but consciously since I was 19. And that by now is quite a long time ago. And I came on the path so young, relatively speaking, because I was so concerned about my inability to see the goal, and even more concerned about my inability to move myself toward that goal. That there were just always, no matter what I thought, there were so many conflicting cross currents within my own nature. And we see it all around us. It comes out in little ways. There's 4 cookies in the box, I'm going to have 1, or maybe 2, or why not 3? And there's only 1 left, so why don't I just finish the box? I mean, it's not a great sin, it's not going to cause you to be eternally damned, but it's just so fascinating how often we start out in one direction and we end up in another. I'm going to go to the family reunion, and no matter what drunk Uncle Mort says, I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to respond, I'm not. Yes, I am going to respond. Where does it come from? And then afterwards we think, oh, one more time. And you can go all by yourself. I recently was 8 weeks in a writing seclusion, just all by myself, except for me. I was there. And when there was so little other than me, it just became so apparent how many of me's there are. Now, we can then, which is what I watch a lot of people do, we can become very divided against ourselves, which I don't recommend, where half of us is our own enemy. And that was I tried it. I don't recommend it. I did it for a really long time. I don't recommend it. But I watch people do it all the time, where there's just always this, I should be better, why can't I do it? And so even the internal world, not only does one have all of that inclination to eat all 4 of those cookies, but you also have this complex on top of it about how terrible I am because I do it. Now, I'm going to recommend something really wonderful that really works for me. The devil made you do it. I mean, I know the devil didn't really make me do it, but I find it very convenient to think that the devil made me do it. There's a lot of, let's see, I don't know if games is actually the words I want to use. Swami Kriyananda used to do something with us that, we did it for fun, but it was very helpful. He would often exaggerate attitudes and then tease us about them. I remember once, this woman had a very exaggerated romantic idea about love and relationships, and Swami actually sang her the whole of love is a many-splendored thing, not in a way that was uplifting, but about the smarmiest rendition I've ever heard of that. He was just taking her own dreamy inclination and just pulling it way, way over till, we were laughing hysterically, but it was teasing on the mark, because it was just how her mind was. Or whenever Swamiji would see an automobile that he thought was particularly nice, with a great deal of, I am the prophet making the pronouncement from the mountain, he would declare that he approved of that design. As if the whole auto industry was just wanting to know what Swami Kriyananda thought about their new model, which is ridiculous, but don't we often behave that way? As if the whole world is just breathlessly wanting to know what we think. And he would tease us with those things so that when you were inclined to fall into them, you would remember. But I've found that if I can recognize that something is compelling me, and even if it is my own psychology or my own karma, my own vrittis, my own delusion, we have lots of words for these things, there is another reality that is the true self. And that's what we're working with when we're talking about the devil, you see? It's like, yes, it's true that temporarily I have gotten confused about my own real nature. We have all these stories. Someone was telling a story this week about the lion cub that accidentally got deposited with the sheep. and just grew up thinking it was a sheep, and it just didn't know it was a lion until it met another lion. And just, it's the purpose of such a story is self-evident. But underneath some of these very simple tales is this extremely powerful reality, which is that we are pure gold who have been frolicking in the mud for so long that that pure gold is covered with the mud. And it's so deeply covered, we've forgotten what the real power is in there. And the magnificent thing about gold is, no matter how long it's buried, no matter how much it's covered, all you have to do is wash it off. And then there it is again, just as gold as it was ever gold. Nothing can make it not what it is. Again, these are the images. We use these images because it's so hard for us to grasp with the rational mind how everything I know really isn't what it seems. So these are very convenient realities for us to really realize that there's I am that uplifted divine force. I am the being that understands that error is misery, and that no matter how much I think I'll be happy if I eat all 700 of those cookies, at the end of that time, I'm not going to feel better, I'm going to feel sick. And Satan, so to speak, is the force that tries to persuade you otherwise, just like that. There was a little girl who was in our kindergarten class. She was a humdinger of a person. She's grown up to be a really powerful lady. And one day, and she was in kindergarten, and she was using all of her powerful will in a not very good manner. And finally, the kindergarten teacher took her aside and basically said, what's happening today? And she says, well, every day I have a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and they both talk to me. I usually try to listen to the angel, but today I'm listening to the other one. And just children are just so free, isn't it like that? Today I'm listening to the other one. And if the devil made you do it, then you can repudiate wrong behavior without having to feel that I myself, am dark. And now, that's part of the reason why Satan is important, is that we can impersonalize even our own karma. We can, even though it's our karma, and we have to take responsibility, approach the path from lots of different angles, but there's still this force. And the other reason why it's important to understand is, don't imagine for a second that you're going to drift effortlessly into pure happiness. There is a counter force to the effort to rise. And again, whatever you call that, I mean, I don't really think of the devil all the time except conveniently when the devil made me do it and I need to blame someone other than me. I think of it more like yoga, the way yoga works, which is you have these vrittis, which are whirlpools of habit and unresolved issues and karmic debts, like when you got away with it and nobody caught you, and now you're getting caught even though you didn't do it this time. I was in a situation once where I was accused of something really not very laudable. I was absolutely innocent in terms of the facts. But I was perfectly conscious that the only reason I really hadn't done it is I hadn't had a chance yet. If I'd really actually been given the opportunity, probability is I would have gone there. So it was really like I got punished before I did it, but I also got punished. It was not that big, but I got blamed for what I knew I could just feel it, like I got away with it before. We talk about karma, and sometimes I've heard the word more recently, a karmic debt. I find that unpaid bills, that's the phrase that I liked. Just unpaid bills. You managed to do something that was dissonant to your higher nature, and the consequences didn't catch up with you until another incarnation. And so I like that way of thinking about it. That's one of the ways of, you're always being treated fairly. You just may not remember when you set this in motion. But your chakras remember, because all that energy stays in there. But the point I want to make here is, whatever you call it, there is a conscious force. That's how Master put it. I add my testimony. I used to say that Satan was just a myth, but there's a conscious force, because there's the material plane is the last manifestation of much more subtle energy. Things are there's causal worlds and astral worlds. Causal is the thought world, astral world is the energy world, then there's the material world. And this effort of the divine light to draw us all back into it is a drama that's happening on all those planes. And there is this conscious force that's trying to hold things in darkness, and there's a conscious force that's trying to bring everything back to the light. And it's kind of stays a certain equilibrium, depending on very subtle forces, like the age of the planet and so on. One of Swami's explanation of persecution of saintly people is very simple, which is that the total wattage of planet Earth at this stage of early Dwapara can only have so many watts, so total. The overall tone has to be this mixture of black and white. So every time something really begins to shine over here, something has to happen to sort of bring it back to whatever it's going to be. And we are a rising age, but we're by no means a high age. At least, God, I hope not. I hope this isn't the top, And the masters all say there isn't. So what that means for us spiritually is that we have to be constantly vigilant, and an enormous amount of the intelligent application, patient, persistent, unrelenting application of determined willpower has to be applied, because there's no sitting still. Because the currents are moving, and if we just start floating, we're just as likely to be floated away from as we are to be floated toward. And that's how God set it up, because the level of the vibrational level on which true freedom and happiness exists is a level of very high energy. And we have to earn that. I mean, it's not that we have to earn it because God is punishing us and is not going to give us our allowance unless we do our chores or something like that. It's that we have to transform ourselves, we have to match it. Just by the very definition, power and freedom is when you have mastery over these forces. And you don't get mastery over things by just lying down and wishing for it. You get mastery by pushing against it. That's how we get strong. And that is, it's that confidence in our ability to tune into that higher level of consciousness. That's what gives us our bliss. Because then we know, no matter what comes, I can deal with this. I had a very silly lesson that has stayed with me. It's been very important. I developed this desire to do a little home repair on my own. There may be people who are worse at it, but I'm way at the bottom. I have a certain number of aptitudes. Home repair is not one of them. But I was just determined, and I went through this whole cycle. I discovered that, you can crash holes in your wall, and then you can fill them with speckle, and then you can repaint them. I learned a lot about home repair. It was just ridiculous. And in the end, I had some very poor home repairs in my house that I'd done all myself. But I learned something that I've remembered ever since. It's been very important. The patient application of willpower will conquer any obstacle. And later I read Sri Yukteswar's definition of tapasya. Tapasya is a marvelous word that whenever anybody gets a spiritual name, you hope that the word tapasya is not anywhere in it. Because tapasya means, well, let's start with the worst definition, suffering. I'm doing tapasya, I'm suffering. But what it really means, and the other word is penance, which is not a very nice one either, but it means that I'm using my willpower against a contrary force to gain a worthwhile objective. Sri Yukteswar described it as patience. just even-minded, determined, waiting it out. But it's dynamic patience, and this is where the dynamism comes from. It's the patience based on the fact that you know the outcome you seek is there. And therefore, no matter how hard the wind blows, no matter how much the devil yowls at you, you know it's there, and you'll just stand here till it comes. You know, when I was doing my little home repair, I knew that in the end it would be done, and all I had to do was not quit. So what is the difference between that and the spiritual path? And what gives us the patience? I mean, I say no matter how horrible the present experience, no matter how many times you set out to do the right thing and lo and behold you do the wrong thing. There's a story in the book, Loved and Protected. That's a book of stories of answered prayers that I myself collected and articulated. And there was this one man, he put his name on his story, and he had a drug problem for quite some period of time. And he had a drug problem after he became a disciple. And he writes in a very amusing way, because that was what he was like. He said, you won't be surprised to hear that one of my favorite sayings of Master was, even if you're going to do the wrong thing, take me with you. And he said, so I took Master to a lot of places I don't think he would have gone on his own. That's how he put it. Now let's see, where was I going with that? Hold on for a moment. Well, but the end of it, I've lost the thread just a little bit, but the end of that story was him just being he was actually arrested and thrown into a jail cell, a cold jail cell in his underwear. That's what happened. But he said it was just the happiest moment of his life. And he said it's one of those stories like I recommend. Become a drug addict, be arrested, get thrown into a cold cell in your underwear, have your whole life stripped apart. Because he just knew now that, the tide was turning. He'd held on to his discipleship despite all the things the devil made him do, And finally there it is. I know what I was talking about. I was talking about just this faith in the positive outcome. That is the most extraordinary aspect of the spiritual path. And everybody talks about it, but it's really one of these things that the longer you stay on the path, the simpler it gets for you, which is, as long as I don't quit, I will succeed. Now, who cares then? That's where tapasya is not tapasya anymore. As long as I don't quit, I will succeed. I was talking to a friend who's going through something I wish people didn't have to go through. And she's miserable, tear-streaked, lots of long days and nights, using up a lot of Kleenex. So on that level, she's not winning, but she's absolutely victorious because there's no way in the world she's going to quit. There's no way in the world she's going to ever believe for a moment that this isn't just one more step toward that freedom. And, the idea that somebody's trying to stop you, which is what Satan is about, really changes the way you relate. And that's the point. These are all just means to an end. None of this world is anything. All of this is just a dream, and it all just disappears. But in the meantime, we have to hook into it in the right way. And knowing that the devil's over there, and if you're not vigilant, he is going to make you do it, and he's not going to suffer. You are. You're the one. And you just keep asking yourself, how much longer do I want to feel this way? And how much strength can I bring to bear to break free? God bless you.